All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed your meal. Round of applause for the kitchen staff, please. We're about to get into it, so I'd like to call on Keith Banks to introduce our special speaker this morning.
It's my pleasure this morning to welcome Michael to be our speaker. First of all, I'd like everybody to give a good round of applause for the fact that Michael is always ready to drop what is regarded as being important at the time, consider what you're talking about and make a quick decision. And I thank you for Michael back in May. So if we could have a round of applause, please. As far as Michael's talk is concerned, I thought it's a little bit, I like to put a little bit of an analogy on it. Michael travels a lot and he is in airports a lot. And in airports, there's travelators, which you hop on and you hop off as you're going towards your embarkation point. And we're all on a faith journey and we're all on a travelator. So a lot of us are on it and off it for different reasons, and there are others of us that are on it for the whole journey, probably to get there first. So I'd just like to, on those remarks, and ask Michael to tell us about his travelator journeys and where he's going next.
Thank you, Keith. Neil, you control that? Yep. Thank you, Keith. Tēnā koutou katoa. Well, where I'm going next, I haven't a clue, but I'm hoping it's something like retirement. Yeah, 30 years ago. Oh, great, that'll go quick. People have hopped off the travelator when I came home. I'm amazed that in 2016 I was reading my journal. I have done journals since 1979, so I read a few of them, just the history of this parish and the new parish, parishes and the new parish. And in 2016 I went away and nobody died either. But 5 have died since I've been back. So, if you do need to leave the talk, I'll understand. Last Friday and there's a little bit of a travel theme, Keith, after 18 hours of travel, I arrived back in Wellington and I was lining up for customs and recalled a midnight flight from Australia a few years previously when I was working for the Nathaniel Centre. And cheerfully that night I handed over the form, but the man didn't really respond in kind. One has to be very careful at customs and immigration, as you know, and be very nice. And he bluntly said to me, "You have not filled in this properly." Oh, but then he said, "I'll ask you the questions you've missed," and went through the various boxes that I hadn't acknowledged or done a tick to. And then in a very severe tone, he glared at me and he said, "After all, you should know better, Michael, because you taught me at St. Bede's College." And then he said to me, "Now get out of here." I used to say that to him in 4th form. Well, Nicholas was nowhere to be seen on Friday afternoon as I handed over my form, this time to a woman, and again I hadn't dated it. She said as she looked through it, "You've been to a lot of countries." Well, yes, the plane blew an engine just out of Venice, so we made an emergency landing in Paris and then on to Madrid before I got to Chicago. So a 10-hour flight, 9-hour flight, took 2 days. "Well," she said, "and your occupation?" "Yes, I'm a Catholic priest." "I can see that, But I have to ask you, Father Michael, are you carrying any holy water? Said, no, only my stolen clericals in the case. Fine, she said, off you go. Forget about the screening and go the shortcut. I didn't have the heart to tell her about the angel that I was carrying in my carry-on bag, nor the Medal of St. Joseph. I'd been to San Juan Capistrano, the mission station in Orange County. Those series of mission stations, they're very, very beautiful, and I'd seen a number of them over the years, but brought an angel from there. That's a great story, and even more interesting that the parish priest who did all the restoration at San Juan Capistrano in the 1930s was none other than Father John O'Sullivan. So I thought, my God, he has had an earlier life. I think travel provides a microcosm of faith, as Keith suggested. Things go very swimmingly and we wax lyrical about the joys of travel. And then when the engines blow and our plans tend we get insights into the people that don't have a home or don't have a turanga waiwai. We bleat, don't we? We're lost. We're like forlorn, newly born lambs. And yet we wouldn't be without it. I think likewise my faith journey, albeit in a very limited way, based on the life and death and resurrection of Jesus, that paschal mystery that we don't really talk about much, the dying and the rising and together. The grain of wheat necessarily dying before transcending darkness to give new life and fresh hope and a fresh harvest. This year I received my gold card from Jacinda. She was tied up with other things at the time. But I give thanks for the gold card and also 35 years of priesthood later this year. 35 and 65 will give you 100% of my faith journey and 100% of Michael McCabe. But they're inextricably combined and both need each other to give the picture of my faith journey. So let me go back and forward a little. And I want to just speak relatively briefly and then open it up for questions. In 1990, I completed my BA with honours in sociology, and St. Joseph's Parish Levin had both sponsored and encouraged my studies. Had Alan Roberts, my co-pastor. We had a team ministry there, which was something. There was a few of them. There was another one in Nelson, but there were a few of them way back. Halfway through that year, I was appointed administrator of Sacred Heart Parish, Petone. At the end of the year, I felt at a major crossroads and even went back to the university and looked at the possibility of studying law. But I made a directed retreat with Alan Roberts, who's a great spiritual director and writer of books on prayer, and a friend, and I made this at a friend's house in Otaki Beach. I did so because I'd been thinking very seriously of leaving priesthood. And at the end of the retreat, I agreed with Alan that that was the thing to do. And I wrote my letter of resignation. But because Advent was beginning, it was the end of November, and I just celebrated my anniversary, I returned to Petone, and I decided to sleep on the letter for a month until after Christmas, when things would be a little bit quieter. I thought to myself, you can't leave a parish at Christmas time. I did put the letter under my mattress and sleep on it. And then I made an appointment with Cardinal Tom to see him early in January. It was a very vulnerable time as you come out of a retreat, staying in the present moment, for that's always the moment of grace. And post-Christmas, I had set up an appointment with Alan. So how do you feel about your letter now, he said. Don't you just love those questions, how do you really feel, moments? Well, I said, I'm not sure. It was on the outside the church at Levin. We were leaning on the rails there, just outside the chapel. I said, I'm not sure I could go through with this, because I can't really separate what is Michael McCabe and what is priest. It's all interwoven now. And we call that in theology a via negativa. You may not know what to do or what conclusions to reach, and you arrive at equipoise and truth by eliminating false or lesser truths, lesser considerations. Alan said he thought that would happen because, as he said, what you were really doing was making a decision to stay a priest by seriously considering leaving. And I'm sure on your faith journeys and your life commitments, you have had those nights and days when you have thought of bagging it all and walking away. So much of faith is running with the projection, as Carl Jung would say. Let it play out. Let the projection play out and see where it takes you. If it's of God, it will happen. If not, it won't. Increasingly, I think that and parcel of the ethical search and the existential angst that is part of our society today. It has an ethical underpinning, the search for God, the search for intimacy, the search for the transcendent. And I think that's the dying and rising. That's the shadow gift, the shadow side of gift and creativity. And that shadow side is doubt. But that's ethical doubt, and I think that's the seedbed of faith. Rainer Maria Rilke talks of living the questions in such depth that one day you will live into the answers. And so much of any faith journey is precisely that, isn't it? Living the questions in a vibrant and generative way. But to do otherwise would be not to walk by faith. I think it would be to walk by sight. That's not what we're talking about. I did go and see Cardinal Tom in 1991 in January the 9th. And I had been invited by Victoria to bypass masters and go straight into my doctorate. And Tom said this, well, I'd like you to do your doctorate, Michael, but I don't want you to do it in Wellington. I'd like you to go to Rome. I couldn't believe my luck. I thought, don't argue with the man about geography, even though it was one of my school cert subjects. So he gave me a list of things that he needed, and I agreed that with him that I would do bioethics and moral theology because I'd worked in a hospital. So the moral theology was largely completed in Rome, the bioethics in the United States. For bioethics was founded there in the late 1960s and up in the Hastings Centre and the Kennedy Institute, the first two bioethical institutes in 1969. But the historical flurries leading to the inception of bioethics and the Vatican Council, I would say, and a lot of the things that happened in the early 1960s, they occurred in Europe, and specifically in Nazi Germany and at the Nuremberg trials of 1947. And one of the things I did on my holiday, which I'm not going to talk about yet, but I'm writing about, is my pilgrimage from Villach, St. Jacob's Way in Austria, where I stayed with parishioners John and Elizabeth Goldingham. Elizabeth is Austrian, and they live 6 months in Paikokariki and 6 months in Villach in Landskron. But from there I made a pilgrimage down to Poland, to Auschwitz. And that was a very powerful experience. And even though I had lectured on the Nuremberg trials a lot in my bioethics career, I really didn't have a clue what people went through. But that's for another day. My studies culminated in a postdoctoral fellowship at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Centre in New York. And so after the year there and 6 months writing a couple of book chapters which were published in palliative care, post-Rome, post-New York, post-Chicago, 4.5 years later after seeing Cardinal Tom, I came home. 24 hours after arriving home at Mum and Dad's in Upper Hutt, I received a call from none other than the Vicar General, Monsignor John Card, our dear friend. Michael, welcome home. It must be good to be home again. charming, in fact, John. New York had offered me a green card and further study, but I knew that if I stayed and took that offer, I would never come home. They couldn't. 3 days running, they came and asked me, "Won't you stay? Can't you pick up this offer?" And I said, "That's not the call. That's not why I was sent overseas." So I said to John, "Yes, it's wonderful to be home, of course. But I did have reverse culture shock for a long time." "Great," he said. "Well, welcome home. Now we'd like you to go to Petone at the end of January." "Petone?" I said. "Yes, well, they liked you there last time." Well, let's not disavow them. So I said, "Petone it is." After all, I did score my first try in rugby against Petone as part of the St Bernadette's 9i Bantams, but it was never a career changer. So that afternoon, early in February 1996, as I walked down Britannia Street, a red-headed boy riding his red tricycle on the other side of the street yelled out to me, "G'day, mister. How's your day going?" "Oh, I've had better ones," I mumbled before I called back, "Great, just great. Thanks for asking." William Warren now works for Caritas in the Nathaniel Centre. He was the little boy on the bike. In his letter of appointment, Cardinal Tom said to me that the appointment was only for 1 year, that I would soon notice they had no church, but don't worry about that, he said, because they haven't got the necessary funds to do anything about it. So essentially he was saying it won't be your problem because you're passing through. And for a time I believed that. And then at Pentecost became convinced that the need for hope was universal and that hope is born out of lived faith. And it was Sister Bridget McGrath, I even put this in the speech, RNDM, a mission sister, who had returned from her mission work in Eritrea. And she was our Caritas Lenten speaker. And she was very, very powerful of what it was like living in mission in Eritrea. And I remember saying to her outside the Petone church, which is the hall there, it's the original church, but now it's converted to a hall. I said to her how hard I was finding it being home and just being, nothing much was happening in little old New Zealand. And she said this to me, "The need for hope is universal. It doesn't matter where you are, you can make a difference. You can give hope." So that was the kick in the pants I needed. And our mantra at Sacred Heart Petone became, "There will never be a right time, there will never be enough money, and there will always be critics. So let's do this anyway." So with Anne Dickinson and George Bignell as the chairs of the building project, and by the way as the co-founder with me of the Nathaniel Centre, we did do it. We noticed on the ruins, the facade was still there, but the church that I had worshipped in before I went to Rome was completely demolished. It was an ugly time for the parish. There was a court order taken out to protect Father John Murphy, my predecessor, and he had moved to Kaikoura, where he was so encouraging to me because he had been on mission furlough in South America, so he knew about reverse culture shock. But he had salted away 400,000, which I don't think His Eminence at the time knew about. He'd had raffles and concerts and all sorts of things. And when we found that, it was a wonderful platform to launch this work of faith. And so we'd noticed that the second church, now demolished, was open on the feast of Christ the King. We said to the parishioners, "What say we go for the feast of Christ the King next year?" That gives us 18 months to build a church. And so we invited Cardinal Tom to open that church, firstly at dawn, with the dawn service. Some of you were there, and then to continue later on in the morning. In June that year, though, we ran out of money, and we'd gone out on a limb to build the church we had actually, to get permission from the diocese, when the figures didn't stack up, we took things out of the proposal that we put into the diocese. Things like pews, sound system, and plastering. I was told later by Cardinal Tom and his board of administration at a Christmas dinner when I was at Viard by then, we knew what you were doing, don't think you fooled us. But they weren't going to argue. When we raised money, we'd say, well, what should we put in next? Let's have some seats. But in June, July that year, it would not stop raining. It just rained and rained and rained. And it's a sloping floor. We're not allowed to have one here in our new church. But it's a sloping floor, an intimate space, and at the bottom of the slope and around the sanctuary, all that was flooded. So to get to the sanctuary, you had to use a painter's plank, a building plank. The roofers couldn't get the roof on, and so we couldn't drain the sanctuary. We couldn't finish, and it was a conundrum. Plus, we had the slight detail of $30,000 worth of unpaid accounts, and we were whistling Dixie and had run out of money. So on a very wet Friday night, I went over to the roofless, flooded church shell, and standing on the wooden plank to the sanctuary, yelled out to the heavens, this is the polite version, listen, I am trying to do your work. Now get off my back and stop the bloody rain and send some bloody money. And Penehe, the Tokelauan associate priest, now parish priest of Porirua and a wonderful priest and friend, he heard the yelling out and he came over in the rain to the building site and said to me, Mike, is everything all right? Who are you yelling at? I said, I'm yelling at God. And he said, oh shit. He said, you're very scary when you argue with God. Indeed I was, but I just let him have it because I was sick of what he was doing, the way he was running things. But I think seriously in an adult relationship of faith, you should be able to argue with each other without destroying either party. And besides, within 10 days the rain did stop and the bills got paid. I called 3 priests, John Card, James Lyons and Monsignor Norman Pettit. And John Card, and between them, they raised the $30,000 in their parishes. And Mons Pettit also gave me some wonderful advice. He said, you sound very stressed, Michael. The only advice I can give, and he had been a builder himself at Heratonga and other places, he said, the only advice I can give is to reduce the stress is just move the waste paper basket closer to your desk. He said, it makes it easier to open the mail. So these were the giants that sort of helped me, and as with John Murphy and Pene. Thomas Merton said that we should be able to argue with God, and that, quote, God and mankind can face each other in an authentic dialogue, which implies a true reciprocity between persons, each of whom fully respects the other's rights and his or her freedom. He says that's mature faith, and it's born out of the scriptures. He said if you have a look at Moses, that's exactly what he does. In October 93, I recall concelebrating Mass with Pope John Paul in his private chapel with Cardinal Tom and Archbishop Tom White, whom I used to work for at the Nunciature before I went to Rome, and the New Zealand bishops. They were in Rome for their ad limina. I was sitting directly behind John Paul, and I could have touched him on the shoulder. I was very moved that post-communion, during his Thanksgiving time, he was groaning and moaning and talking out loud, and I thought, oh, that boy's not well. And as we walked post-reception with John Paul, as we walked across St. Peter's Square to Casa del Clero, I was walking with Cardinal Tom and Bishop Len Boyle. I said to them I thought that the Holy Father was most unwell. Really what I was saying was, I think I'm going to get to see a papal election. Won't that be great? But Bishop Len said to me, No, he's always done that. He always does that after communion. And in prayer. It's like he's arguing with God. It's like he's Jeremiah, a very reluctant prophet. And that to me was faith in action. Gutsy, real faith. Who a bully, who ignored serious issues that we're having to face now on his watch, who protected people, but he was still a man of incredible virtue. And I met him a number of times, firstly in Wellington on his trip, but he wrote that wonderful letter, Fides et Ratio, Faith and Reason. And he teaches us all that you need faith and reason and together, because they are like two wings of a bird in its flight towards truth. And faith by itself leads to fundamentalism, while reason by itself, he says, ultimately leads to disappointment and cynicism. I've been blessed with an education here in New Zealand and overseas in Rome, Chicago and New York. I've been very privileged to see how different cultures and countries and different parts of the church combine the two, faith and reason, and how they can also, as we do here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, focus too much on just one dimension to the detriment of the other and to the detriment of our pastoral work. So how do I combine faith and reason? Well, by reading and writing and prayer and graced solitude. I wouldn't always say that the solitude's been graced, but it is now. I've always kept journals like this since 1979. I have cabinets full of them. So it's a lot of history of the parishes, of projects, of experiences here in Europe and in the United States. It's one of the ways I reflect, and it's one of the ways I pray my faith. I'm no Thomas Aquinas, I'm no John Henry Newman or Thomas Merton, or even Henri Nouwen, whom I had lunch with once in Chicago. But all of them prayed with a pen in their hand. All of them wrote as they prayed. I see faith as reflective, and writing down our story, journaling our story, is to live twice, at least twice, I think. The first time's historical, the second time is spiritual. And going to memoir class, as you know, I've been doing for the last 3 to 4 years at Victoria, has been a wonderful gift. It's helped me make sense of my story. It's helped me bring it healing. It's made me a better preacher too. And I did do fresh writing in Austria, a piece that I completed there. Allow me to just finish with a page from the beginning of the memoir, which might sort of sum up the faith journey. The people who have called me into priesthood, called me back into priesthood again and again, are the people on the edges, the people with little or no voice, often with little standing within a particular culture, society, church, ethnicity or lifestyle. For me, these people I have been privileged to serve, consistently witness to Christ, to his dying, to his forgiveness, to his compassion, and to his resurrection. I write about these people because their stories have changed and clarified my own story. Their lack of voice has empowered my own voice in ministry. Their search for love has reminded me of the longing for the old story, as Vincent van Gogh said to his brother Theo, of the deeply human need to belong, to have a tūranga waiwai, a place where one can truly stand and have one's voice welcomed in its uniqueness. Such a belonging place is on the boundaries of what is considered orthodox, safe and secure, and it is here that I have ministered to them for a very short time. In truth, however, it was on the boundary of the safe and acceptable that they ministered to me, so that I could reach further into my soul. In my own search for love and acceptance, and in my own need for belonging in Christ, they did not seem fazed when my own search for belonging and love strayed from the virtuous path. They gently encouraged me by the depth of their own integrity, to continue to grow in integrity by depthing the God of the transcendent. As with all stories, their story and my own have become intertwined, and it's hard to know precisely where their story ends and my own begins. It was Paul Tillich who once observed that what is most deeply personal is most deeply human. Henri Nouwen developed that linkage between the public and the private, the interweaving between the personal and the deeply human, when he said, anyone trying to live a spiritual life will soon discover that the most personal is the most universal, the most hidden is the most public, the most solitary, the most communal. What we live in the most intimate places of our beings is not just for us, but for all people. That is why our inner lives are lives for others. That is why our solitude is a gift to our community. And that is why our most secret thoughts affect our common life. I would be less than honest if I said I had readily and consistently embraced the personal. Inevitably, that has impacted on my ability to embrace the humanity in all people, the people I have been called to serve. And that thread runs through all of these stories, as does the thread of growth and maturation. As with any tapestry, neither thread provides the completed story. In my first appointment as full-time chaplain at Wellington Hospital and Mary Potter Hospice, the dying and the loss became the backdrop to the call of the Holy Spirit, calling me ever more deeply into the priesthood of Christ. This was the setting for my decision to stay a priest, to remain a priest, and the setting that reminded me every day why I had become one. This was also the defining wellspring for my priesthood, for it is in this environment that I learnt about my own fear of death, namely of having nothing left, that is, no thing left. No thing left, whether that thing be a lover, a parent, a friend, or even an addiction. No thing left save Christ. And as the stories, and there are a lot of them now, will show, to say goodbye to these things is at times heartbreaking, even if the word goodbye can mean God be with you. While saying goodbye is an intricate part and a necessary part of my priesthood, my chosen path in life is just that, chosen. It is no longer a default position, for it is in priesthood and in my service as priest that my greatest gifts have both been revealed and fulfilled. Thank you very much.
Father, you were responsible about the structure of the Tony Church. Can you tell us your experience about St. Joseph's, which I think that you were responsible for the construction of a new church there?
Certainly, David. Well, in all of the parishes I've been in, they're the churches of the parishioners, as please God, Our Lady of Kapiti's one will be. And every Petone, we were sort of fledglings. We didn't know which way was up. But in St. Joseph's, they had a wonderful crew led by Mark Richards. And that team of 6 were an amazing group to work with. And really, I think it was Monsignor John Card who had encouraged the gift. So mine was the privilege really of just walking with them. I did go over when I was at Viard. So post-Petone, I had 18 months working in bioethics and at the cathedral to help them with the last restoration and their fundraising. Father Peter O'Connell led that project. But I did go over to St. Joseph's before my appointment began, and John had really marinated, as had Owen Dolan for 10 years before him, John for 10 years after him. And so they were ready to go. As you know the story, they had dreamed of a church at St. Joseph's for some 80 years. And on top of the chapel, a mate of mine, Wayne McGurran, who had a sign and display corporation, made this banner, 92 years in the making. So that's how long it took for St. Joseph's to get its church. That was where the cathedral was going to be, where the car sales place, just by the old Grey Mother, St. Patrick's College, and there was a chapel there, an octagonal chapel. So here, because the design was Studio Pacific, and I think each parish, I've learned, has to do things in their own way. And so bringing, too many ideas from Petone to Mount Victoria came unstuck. Bringing too many ideas from Mount Victoria to Kapiti came unstuck. So the learning is listening, the learning is praying, and the design emerged from that. I mean, it's a very beautiful design, and it's a very simple design. It's a koru on a cross. So the heart of the koru is baptism, the baptismal font, and then it unfolds, and the biggest part is the gather, the Bill Pierce room, Charles's brother-in-law. So that's the biggest room, because that's the biggest part of the frond, because we are sent out for mission. It's an idea that the synod picked up on. So that's how it emerged, really. And it was a combining of the old, so enough of the old that people could walk in and say, well, there's the crucifix, or there's the stained glass windows, or... So, long time in the making, but really John Card's work.
Michael, can you talk a little bit about the earlier days prior to 30 that you did, and what led you to priesthood?
Well, I left school when I was 16. I'd sat UE as it was then and missed it. I was pretty wild at school, and I've talked about that in some homilies over the years, and pretty bored at school, because there were just different ways of learning, and my way of learning is really by being shown, not by being told. But I'm over all of that, of course, now. But yeah, right. So I left and did my apprenticeship in gardening and horticulture, and I did that at Lower Hutt City Council and Blenheim Borough Council for eight months. So I think Blenheim was probably the beginning of, the stirrings of a vocation. And I hadn't been, I've told that story, I had not been, I'd been going to church, but I hadn't been to the sacraments for about 4 years, and went on a day off from my gardening to see David Burke, who was the parish priest of Nainai, St. Bernadette's. Father Terry Carr was the assistant, and he was our youth chaplain, our YCW chaplain, but I waited till he had a day off and would be out of the presbytery. So I went, so here we are celebrating Mass together now, but every Sunday. So it was David, I remember at the end of that confession, him saying to me, I thought you'd come here today to talk about priesthood. And I said, after all of this, and was playing rugby for Hutt Valley Marist, and they were pretty wild days. Lots of parties and things. Some of those people in parties actually met and got married and have their relatives in this room, so the parties went all bad. So that really sowed a seed, and he said to me, put it behind you and have a think, just be open. And so when I finished my apprenticeship, I was going back to Blenheim because I loved Blenheim and the working there, and was doing a sideline and harvesting garlic, and the vineyards were just starting up, in the olives. So Blenheim was about to take off, and there was a lot of prospects down there for me. But Fortuna was also part of the story, Fortuna Retreat House, and we had been there, the Avalon and 9 people, the night that it burnt down. I still have my father's cross. It's in the office there that was burnt, black cross. And we, in the fundraising to rebuild that, we were working in apprentices. So Father Jim Bevan would run these fundraisers where they'd raffle off bottles of whiskey as the prizes, and because of all the law, they were called bottles of perfume, and you went behind the curtains to receive your prize, but that's what it was. That's where I got drunk on whiskey at 17. Have never touched it since. But Fortuna wanted a gardener, so I said, well, I'll give you 6 months. They had no money, but they said, we'll give you accommodation. So I lived with that group of 5 priests and 5 brothers, and from there I went to Green Meadows. I did have an intellectual hang-up because I'd done no good at school, so I thought it was beyond me. I remember going to see Father Des Hickey, who was the provincial at the time, and I thought I was just going for a chat, I ended up walking out with all the seminary papers to fill in, and, so we'll just go and have a look, Des said, inimitable style. It's a bit like a university, you could just have a look. If you don't like it, you can always go. So I've stayed. But I remember when I was chaplain and Des was dying in Mary Potter Hospice, and saying to my former confreres, look, you're not being with him, you need to be with him. So they were, but the day that he died, I had the funeral of a little baby, the day of his funeral, I had a funeral of a little baby, Lisa. I won't give her surname, but I went over to the Wilson funeral home to pick up her tiny white casket, and I was holding the baby as I was looking at Father Des's open casket with his purple vestments and a Madonna and Child on his chest. And I recalled that lovely line from one of James K. Baxter's poem, "Sin, I see no sin, I carry the child I was given to hold." I'm just still there crying. So I couldn't get to Des's funeral because I was up in Karori burying Lisa. So there've been those sort of faith moments where, things have been healed along the way, misunderstandings or partings. It's all of a piece, it all comes together again.
I have a very personal question. For most of us, with families, we get our emotional support within that family. You're very special as a priest because you are warm and human. How do you get your emotional support and validation, if you like?
Well, I think I'm really blessed to be in a parish like Our Lady of Kapiti. And I've always found, and I've written about that in the latest piece, I've always found change hard, but change is necessary for me because I do get my feet under the table and I get a bit lazy and take shortcuts really. And so we need in ministry to be challenged. But what I've found is that whenever I have gone and been committed to where I am, even in New York, that's the story I've written lately, there's always good people. There's always people that... It's really what Augustine, we had his feast the other day, Augustine says, the eagerness of faith in the hearer draws forth the faith of the preacher. And I think that's what affirmation does for me. And being in a parish where I feel deeply loved and supported and challenged, and have had to make hard decisions, but so do you. And so it's a mix, really, family and friends. The people that I've stayed with in Austria just recently, John and Elizabeth, one of my weddings, and the people in Chicago and Green Lake, Wisconsin, and Orange County, they're all dear friends. And, I didn't go near the parish church because we lost a couple of days on the trip. I went to Mass. I celebrated Mass up in Austria and said Mass in Wisconsin. But, I was just with friends who were deeply supportive and deeply loving, and we go back a long way. So that's how I get my support. And then the solitude is necessary, I think, just to have time to think. I don't have a TV. I just listen to music like last night and sit by the fire and read. Because there's a lot I don't know. I mean, I had no clue really about the history of Europe. So I've just read a very solid read about Auschwitz and, the complicity and what led up to it. Because there are, there's always historical flurries, and the flurry is just, that there's going to be snow because of the flurries and the wind. You can see the signs, and, there are flurries of great disintegration at the moment, as you know, in the church and in the United States. So, I don't know, that's a bit rambly. Does that help?
Michael, how does the church respond to that elephant in the room?
Well,
You don't see it on television, you don't have television, but it sort of dominates the television.
Well, it dominated the... I do read the websites, and I listen to... Some of my friends have key leadership positions in the church in the United States, certainly in the Archdiocese of Chicago, and I spent a long time talking with them. It's ghastly. I think we haven't done a very good job, you may disagree, but I don't think so, with sexuality in the church. We've struggled with it like a donkey under a burden, as one writer once put. And yet it can be a very generative gift, I think, for... John Paul wrote a little bit about the theology of the body, and his idea was that the theology of the body that has two sides. One is in marriage and one is in celibacy. But how do you learn to love, and how do you learn to be celibate, and how do you learn to be a person of faith? It's by trial and error. And the culture, the clerical culture, I think this is why Pope Francis comes in for so much heat, is because he challenges, the clerical culture. He challenges the old darlings who are there for a career, who are there to have the finest place and the finest robes and best colours and that sort of thing. And he cannot abide it. So how do we deal with that? Well, it's a painful time, and I don't know what I'm going to say tonight at Mass, but I do need to address that. The Welcome has a very good article by Gerard Burns and the Pope's letter on the back. I think abuse is evil. It is absolutely evil. And but covering it up and shifting people around, we can't do that, because that's complicit evil. And the Holocaust, what I've learned is, that is complicit evil too. That's not just one people destroying another people, that is complicit evil. What I didn't know is if you take the head of government, the president of Slovakia in the war was Tisi. He was a Catholic priest. So the men were taken away, the Jewish men, and then he did a deal with the Nazis, that government did a deal with the Nazis to pay a pro rata payment to the Nazis to take the women and children as well. He's a Catholic priest. So, you know, this is another elephant in the room, you know, that I've read so many commentaries. Somebody said, the church has faced this before, but the Borgias and the Medicis never had Twitter. Does that help, Jim? I'm not sure it does. I mean, we could have the whole morning on that. Tony.
Michael, thank you very much for your words. I'm just thinking, reflecting on what you were saying and thinking that, in a way, you're given permission to love yourself as a human being, and that's all you can want when you leave this world. And I don't think, if there's one failure in the Catholic Church, that would be it, that we can love ourselves. And I now love myself as a human being, and that's the greatest privilege that God can give you. Thank you.
I think that's one of the gifts of Pope Francis, is that he tells it like it is, and you know, and allows for that, you know, the gradualness of grace that Paul VI and John Paul, the stages of sanctification, the gradualness of the journey. He's picked up on that idea. Fairly, did you have? Resignation. I've still got it. Yeah, yeah. So behave. Yeah. No, I did. It's. I have got that journal. Became the Bertoni Journal and the Beginning of Rome Journal. So I don't know who's going to inherit all this writing. Maybe the shredder.
Michael, if I can, just a wee anecdote to some of the things you just said earlier on. In '93, I think it was, Lynn and I had the privilege of being in St Joseph's Parish in Levin. And Michael announced that he was going to Rome. And Lynn and I said, oh, we're going to Rome too later on. So we swapped phone numbers. Lynn and I eventually got to Rome, and we tried ringing Michael on this phone number. And all we got was a nun who could speak nothing else but Italian, so that didn't work. We went out that day and tried to visit the Vatican, and it was shut for a papal mass. We got back that night, and we finally managed to get hold of Michael. He said, I've been trying to get hold of you all day. I said, oh, we've been too. He says, yeah, I wanted to come to a mass with thee today. We had 2 spare seats, it was for you and Lynn. That was the papal mass. And I said, oh, okay, so where are we going for tea? Lynn and I were expecting to go to some flash Italian restaurant with the best of pasta and all the rest, and Michael said, well, I'm sick of bloody pasta, we're going for Chinese.
We did, and on Saturday morning after class at the Alfonsianum by Maria Maggiore, we would go to McDonald's. So we just had to have, you know, once a week we had to have a break from this fine food. But with John and Lynn, I hate heights. I have a real fear of heights. But John and Lynn came and said, shall we climb the cupola? And I said, oh yes, of course, you know, not knowing, telling them how scared I was. But you go up inside St. Peter's, and then outside it's a slight. But I've done it twice, and everyone wants to talk. I just want to freeze and get out of there and say, oh, it's lovely, yeah, that's Rome, let's go, you know. But I did do it with John and Lynn Jardine. No, Greg.
So I'd like to know, Father, you're a well-read person. Any books that you actually cherish that you'll never get rid of, no matter how small your bookcase gets? You'll always keep at your side, just for.
Yeah, there are a few. One of the things in memoir you have to read if you want to write, and so a lot of the novels, and there are a number of people that we sort of just move them around the parish. So there are a lot of novels. I think the writings of Henri Nouwen, because I'd met with him and talked with him, and it's a very similar story. He was somebody who was sort of on the edge, but trying to sort of straddle, opposites in ministry. That would be one. But I could show you the ones. That's a good question. I'll have a think and let you know. But I've got a few and divested a few too. Helen, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
If it's not, I'll have to talk louder. 4 years ago, I made my first trip to Ireland. And part of that trip, I went to Blarney Castle and I kissed the stone. And if anyone has ever been to Blarney Castle to kiss the stone, it's the most uncomfortable thing you can ever do. Leaning over backwards, thinking I'm going to fall down and all the change is going to fall out of my pocket, or my glasses, or my false teeth. And I think, I kissed the Blarney Stone, and I'm sorry, I'll never be as good a speaker as Father Michael. Did you swallow it? Thank you, Michael. To me, life has been very much like the builder's plank. Walking across through life, sometimes you fall off one side, sometimes you fall off the other side. You managed to get through to the sacristy or the sanctuary across the builder's plank and have that word with the Lord. And I think sometimes, as you said, we need to have that loud talk, that strong talk with our God to say, hey, it's not right, or I'm having a great day, keep it up. And maybe what my problem is I don't take the journals. And if you've got that many journals that are pouring out of the cupboards because you haven't got any more room, well, I think you're blessed to be able to go back, to refresh your memory, be able to look back and say, yes, I remember when, by looking at your journal. I've got family that keep saying, no, Dad, it didn't happen that way. My memory and theirs is slightly different. I'm sure mine is right. But I don't have the proof. But I have the children which can actually keep me on the straight and narrow, which will say, no, Dad, that didn't happen. Not quite that way. So, Michael, I do thank you on behalf of everybody here for such a fantastic, enlightening trip through your faith journey. It's made a lot of sense to me. It's actually said to me that, hey, I'm not alone. I'm not alone in having these questions, whether I'm doing the right thing or the wrong thing, whether I am making friends or whether I'm making enemies, and sometimes an enemy is another name for a friend in a slightly different guise, because the enemy you see is actually the one who said to you, think again. You need to think again on what you're saying, and because he's disagreeing with me, hello, what do I say? Well, you're not a friend of mine. Over time, that changes. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart, for me, and I'm sure for everybody else in this room, for such an enlightening, wonderful story. Your story, his story. And I think, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you for the perfume. Thank you.
Oh.
Thank you, Alan. It's one of those occasions where you say, goodness me, who wants to follow this lot? It has been a fabulous morning, but last Sunday I had the occasion to go to Mass in Auckland, and after Mass I was yapping with the priest, and he said, well, where are you from? And I said, well, I'm actually from Our Lady of Carmody Parish. He said, boy, oh boy, the things that we keep hearing about what are going on in that parish. And when you hear Michael this morning, it's not hard to understand why we are in a parish that's blessed. And funnily enough, I'm giving a speech on Monday. I hope no one's going to have to go to it. But to the Camellia Society. To the Camellia Society, and one of the subject of the speech is Waikanae, the Promised Land. And if I could do half as well as what Michael has done this morning, but certainly in terms of Our Lady of Carmody Parish, this men's group is very much part of that, and we are blessed. We're blessed to have Michael. We're also blessed to have a group of individuals like yourselves. And having said all those nice things about you, I would like to remind you that coming up on the 26th, 27th, 28th of October, we've got 3 days of celebration events, starting on the Friday night with the dinner at Southwoods. Saturday there is the gala, and then on Sunday there's going to be an outdoor mass. And thank you for the efforts that a number of you have already volunteered for. Thank you for that. And if you said, what's the way I can help the most? Probably at the moment is to get yourself a table. We've got 30 tables in Southwoods, 30 tables of 10. Here we are 2 months out, and I can tell you that 22 of the 30 have already gone. So that's a fabulous position to be in. But if you can put a table together, please, you can contact me, contact the office. If you've got somebody that would like a sponsorship, I just happen to have in my pocket some sponsorship forms with ideas on them, and if you'd like one of those, please see me after breakfast, and I'd love to give you one. But again, thank you, Michael, for your efforts this morning, and gentlemen, thank you for being part of this wonderful men's group.
So we've got a few notices. Next breakfast is on the 24th of November, and that'll be including the men from the Anglican parishes, so you're welcome to attend. And there's a karaoke competition here tomorrow evening. Starts at 5 o'clock. There'll be some singing, then a big roast, and some more singing. So come along. I think it's $25, isn't it? Yep. And if you're interested, you have to register and go talk to Matalena after this event. Yep. And we have some good men who have passed, and there are going to be some funerals on Monday. There it is there. Thank you. So Hanley Hoffman, wife Doreen, there'll be a requiem mass on Monday at 11 a.m. Our Lady of Fatima, Waikanae, and also Dirk van den Eykel, wife Agnes, also Monday 2 p.m. Now, there's been some talks about loving yourself, and it's been talks about our faith journey. I recently visited another church. How dare I? I was invited to. And afterwards we talked to the pastor. Other churches do things slightly differently. You might be aware that they do praise and worship. I find this really uncomfortable because as a Catholic, I was never taught how to praise and worship, apart from reading Psalms and reading the Bible and mentioning people use the word praise a lot. When I praise my son, I say, well done, or I say, thank you, or I say, keep it up. Now, we talked to one of the pastors afterwards, and she said, men in particular have difficulty with praising and thanking God. Yet when they're watching their favourite sports team, they scream at the TV and raise their fist. Yes! So I'd like to invite you all to inject a wee bit of that in your life. Some of you may say, well, I praise and worship God in my own quiet way. I meditate, I reflect. You know, but we've all used that one, Holy Mary, full of grace, please help me find a parking space. What I'm saying is, try it on for size, and eventually you'll be doing what I do, you know. When something great happens, instead of saying, I did it, I say, thank God, all right? So try it on for size. Now, a local barber recently got arrested for selling drugs. I was blown away. I'd been his customer for about 4 years, and I had no idea he was a barber.
Get your own